Okay, let's dive into this explainer. There's this massive illusion out there that owning a shopping mall is literally as simple as buying a gigantic building, tossing in some stores, and just sitting back while the rent checks roll in. Sounds like the ultimate easy money setup, right? Well, actually, the reality is way darker. It's one of the most precarious, mathematically bizarre financial traps in all of real estate. So here's the big question. How exactly does a full, thriving mall go bankrupt? From the outside, it looks like a literal money printing machine. But today, we're going to uncover a hidden trapdoor that can take a 98% occupied, beloved local landmark and turn it into absolute rubble, and do it in shockingly little time. Let's peel back the layers on how this math actually works. Which brings us to part one, the myth of easy money. See, before you collect a single dime of rent, you have to actually buy or build the thing. Building from scratch, with the endless parking lots, climate control, and all the zoning permits, that can cost as much as building a small hospital. And if you're buying an existing mall, you're not really buying a building. You're placing an unbelievably massive bet on a very specific neighborhood. And the gap between the winners and losers here, it is absolutely staggering. Class A luxury malls, the ones with waitlists for high-end brands, those routinely trade for over $1 billion. But lower-tier malls, they can sell for a tiny, tiny fraction of their construction costs. To put that into perspective, Ohio's Rolling Acres Mall once sold for just $2.75 million. Now that might sound like a lot, but the previous owner paid over $33 million for it. The value just completely vanished into thin air. And because of that massive, highly concentrated risk, most folks don't buy malls privately. Instead, they use a real estate investment trust, or a REIT. Essentially, this is a company that owns income-producing property, but legally, it pays out almost all of its profit to shareholders to avoid corporate income tax. It's a pretty brilliant setup because it lets ordinary investors buy into a massive portfolio of malls for the price of a cup of coffee. You spread out your risk, and hey, you never have to personally deal with a leaking roof or a broken escalator. Okay, moving on to part two, 4 layers of revenue. The way a mall actually generates income is incredibly layered. It starts with base rent, and this is wild. Massive anchor department stores, your Sears or Macy's, might pay around $5 per square foot, but those tiny specialty clothing shops right next door, they're paying $40 to $60 per square foot. Think about that. The store with the biggest sign pays pennies on the dollar. Why? Because the little stores are literally subsidizing the anchor's discount just to get a piece of the foot traffic that the giant store brings in. But base rent is really just the foundation. Malls also collect percentage rent, meaning once a store crosses a specific sales breakpoint, the mall takes a cut of every single thing sold above that line. On top of that, you have CAM fees, common area maintenance, where tenants are billed to physically run the building. Floor cleaning, lighting, security. And lastly, non-store revenue. We're talking parking fees, digital ad boards, and those random pop-up events. But the absolute craziest part of that non-store revenue is what we call kiosk math. In the mall game, position is worth way more than space. A tiny little cart selling sunglasses or phone cases sits directly in the path of every single shopper. So management charges a massive premium purely for that foot traffic. Per square foot, a tiny kiosk right in a busy intersection is often the most valuable real estate in the entire building. All right, part 3, the architecture of spending. So, how do they get all of those people to walk past that kiosk? Well, the physical architecture itself is essentially weaponized to maximize movement. Developer Alfred Taubman was a total pioneer here. He didn't just build malls, he engineered them. Anchors are deliberately spaced roughly 3 city blocks apart. Escalators and elevators placed at the absolute far ends of hallways, never in the middle. And the lighting is this perfect mix of skylights and artificial glow, so shoppers completely lose track of time. He designed it so you literally have to walk the full length of a corridor, passing dozens of high-paying smaller stores before you reach your destination. Exposure is the actual product. Which brings us to part 4, the anchor tenant trapdoor. Because the entire system relies so heavily on those massive department stores, there's a major hidden risk built right into the floorboards, the co-tenancy clause. This is a contract term that allows the smaller stores to pay drastically reduced rent or even exit their leases entirely if a major anchor store closes. So you could be looking at your investment thinking you have an incredibly healthy, fully rented mall, but the second one big anchor goes dark, dozens of other tenants are legally allowed to pay you pennies or just stop paying altogether. The floor drops off from under you without you doing a single thing. And to really grasp the scale of this trigger, just look at this number, 80%. When retail giant Sears filed for bankruptcy back in 2018, roughly 80% of their branded stores were located inside regional malls. That wasn't just a handful of stores closing down, it was a nationwide trigger for co-tenancy clauses. It sent a massive shockwave of rent reductions through hundreds of properties all at the exact same time.
Let's look at part 5, Anatomy of a Death Spiral. So, how exactly does one closed anchor spark a total financial collapse? Well, it's basically a domino effect. Step 1, the anchor leaves. Step 2, obviously, that giant empty space generates zero income. But here is step 3, the real killer. Fixed shared expenses, like heating and security, they don't shrink just because a store's empty. So those fixed CAM costs instantly shift over to the remaining stores. The loyal tenants who stayed behind are suddenly quietly facing rising maintenance bills, which directly triggers step 4, pushing out the marginal tenants who just can't afford the higher costs. It becomes this vicious cycle where vacancy literally creates more vacancy. Now, you might be thinking, just get a new tenant in there, right? Well, it's not that simple. Subdividing an empty anchor box is brutally slow and wildly expensive. Remember, these are massive 100,000 square foot boxes with heavy-duty loading docks. One mall owner literally spent $100 million over 3 years just to carve up a single old department store into 4 smaller spots. Multiply that cost and that timeline across dozens of dying malls, and the problem is just absolutely monumental. Let's look at a real-world autopsy of this exact death spiral. Ohio's Rolling Acres Mall. It opened in 1975, and by the mid-90s, it hit 98% occupancy. Boom, total success. But then, the anchors started leaving. By 2008, the interior officially closed to the public. Between 2011 and 2013, the very last anchors bailed. The massive building just sat there empty. It attracted scrappers, one guy was even tragically electrocuted trying to steal copper, and, eventually, the city seized the whole property for $1 million in unpaid taxes. Finally, between 2016 and 2019, the entire thing was bulldozed to build an Amazon distribution center. From 98% full to a pile of rubble. Which brings us to our final section, escaping the retail apocalypse. Look, I know all of this sounds pretty bleak, but the industry isn't entirely dead. Surviving mall owners are actually keeping their properties alive by radically changing the fundamental product they offer. Back in the 20th century, malls sold convenience. If you wanted to compare 5 different brands of shoes, the mall was the only place to do it in one trip. But online shopping completely shattered that monopoly. So surviving malls today can't just sell products anymore. They have to sell reasons to leave the house. They have to offer experiences that you absolutely cannot get while sitting on your couch waiting for a delivery. Successful owners are dodging this retail apocalypse by filling those empty anchor boxes with things a screen genuinely cannot replace. We're talking restaurants that require physical tables, huge gyms and fitness studios, medical clinics and urgent care, co-working office spaces, and even converting entire wings into apartments or hotels. They're turning pure retail spaces into vibrant, mixed-use properties. And this really brings us to the core takeaway of this explainer. As the saying goes, the building isn't really the business. The people walking through it are. A mall is just a tightly interconnected financial ecosystem. The big anchor store isn't just selling appliances or clothes. It's literally selling the foot traffic that every single smaller store needs to survive. The whole massive structure rests entirely on the physical movement of people. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder. If the physical building is just an elaborate financial trap designed to capture foot traffic, what happens to our communities when the anchors that draw us together disappear entirely? As the giant stores of the past vanish for good, what is going to become the new magnet to keep our local physical spaces alive? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this changes how you look at things the next time you walk into a shopping center.